the WNBA media just made a massive mistake. A national analyst tried defending Stephanie White's system by claiming Caitlin Clark needs to play more off the ball. Then the Ringer published synergy data to shut down critics calling out Indiana's offense. Instead, they accidentally proved the critics were right. Because the numbers clearly show that Caitlin Clark's off-ball role at Iowa looked nothing like what Stephanie White is doing in Indiana. At Iowa, Clark constantly moved without the ball. She ran off screens, made cuts, got catch-and-shoot opportunities, and operated inside a real offensive system designed to get the ball back into her hands. In Indiana, she gives the ball up and stands still. No motion, no screen actions, no relocation, no Steph Curry-style movement, just a decoy parked in the corner. And the craziest part is that the media defending Stephanie White unknowingly exposed her entire coaching philosophy in the process. Because ESPN analyst Lashina Robinson argued that Indiana looked more diverse offensively without Caitlin Clark dominating the ball. There's just one problem with that argument. The Fever were significantly better with Caitlin Clark on the floor. Their offense jumped to elite levels. Their net rating skyrocketed. Their winning percentage improved by double digits. So if the numbers prove the team is better with Clark controlling the offense, why is the coaching philosophy centered around taking the ball out of her hands? That's the contradiction nobody in mainstream WNBA coverage can explain. And now fans are finally starting to notice the WNBA media just made a massive mistake. A national analyst tried defending Stephanie White's system by claiming Caitlin Clark needs to play more off the ball. Then a major basketball publication released synergy data meant to silence critics questioning Indiana's offense. Instead, they accidentally proved the critics were right, because the numbers clearly show that Caitlin Clark's off-ball role at Iowa looked nothing like what Stephanie White is doing in Indiana. At Iowa, Clark constantly moved without the ball. She ran defenders through screens. She cut to the basket. She relocated for catch-and-shoot threes. Every possession had purpose. Every action flowed into another action. The offense was built around maximizing the gravity of the greatest shooter women's basketball has ever seen. In Indiana, she gives the ball up and stands still. No motion, no secondary action, no scramble pressure on the defense, no chaos, just a decoy parked in the corner while the defense gets to relax. And the craziest part is that the people defending Stephanie White accidentally exposed her entire philosophy in the process, because ESPN analysts openly started arguing that Indiana becomes harder to guard when Caitlin Clark doesn't dominate the basketball. Think about how insane that statement actually is. Imagine someone watching prime Steph Curry and saying, you know what would really unlock Golden State? Less Steph Curry. That is basically what Fever fans are hearing right now. And the reason the backlash exploded across social media is because fans are not blind. They are watching the games. They are seeing possessions die in real time. They are watching Caitlin Clark willingly give the ball up early in possessions only to never touch it again. That is not movement offense. That is offensive malpractice. Now, to be completely fair, there is absolutely nothing wrong with Caitlin Clark playing off the ball sometimes. In fact, the best version of her probably includes a balance between on-ball creation and off-ball movement. That was true at Iowa. It is true in the pros. Nobody serious is arguing she should dribble the air out of the basketball for 40 minutes a night. That is not the criticism. The criticism is what happens after she gives the ball up, because there is a gigantic difference between strategic off-ball movement and simply removing your best player from the possession entirely. And that is where this conversation gets uncomfortable for the WNBA establishment. The Ringer article tried to compare Caitlin Clark's role to Steph Curry. On paper, that sounds intelligent. Basketball purists love talking about gravity, motion, relocation, and off-ball pressure. The problem is that Steph Curry does not just hand the ball away and disappear. Steph Curry becomes more dangerous after giving up the ball. That is what makes him terrifying. The second Curry passes, the defense panics. He sprints through stagger screens. He relocates to the wing. He loops around defenders. He forces constant communication mistakes. Entire defensive systems break down because nobody can lose track of him for even half a second. The Warriors weaponized movement. Indiana weaponizes standing still. Those are not remotely the same thing. And once fans realized the media was trying to pretend they were identical systems, the entire narrative collapsed almost overnight. Because now people are going back and actually watching the film. And the film is brutal. There are possessions where Caitlin Clark initiates the offense, gives the ball up, jogs to the corner, and literally never moves again while the shot clock burns down. There are possessions where defenders barely even acknowledge her because Indiana never punishes teams for overhelping. There are possessions where Clark's gravity is completely wasted because there is no organized counter built into the action. That is coaching, or more accurately, the lack of coaching. And this is where the conversation becomes dangerous for Stephanie White, because the excuses are starting to disappear. When the season began, fans were patient. New coach, new system, new chemistry. Fine. Everybody understood there would be growing pains. But now the same patterns keep repeating. The offense stalls. Clark gets trapped. The spacing collapses. And instead of adjusting, Indiana doubles down on reducing her on-ball control. That is why the frustration has reached another level. Because fans are not just angry about losing games, they are angry because they believe they are watching a generational player being misused in real time. And honestly, that is the core issue underneath all of this. Nobody argues about role players like this. Nobody creates national debates over ordinary stars. The reason emotions are so intense is because Caitlin Clark has already changed the economics of women's basketball. Ratings exploded, ticket prices exploded, merchandise exploded, road attendance exploded, national attention exploded. The stakes are bigger now. Every coaching decision gets magnified because people genuinely believe they are watching one of the most transformative athletes the sport has ever seen. So when analysts go on television and suggest the team might actually function better with less Caitlin Clark influence, fans hear something deeper than basketball analysis. They hear insecurity, they hear resistance. And whether that interpretation is fair or not, the WNBA media has done an absolutely terrible job managing that perception. Because instead of addressing criticism honestly, too many analysts immediately attack the audience itself. That is where the YouTube slop backlash came from. It was not just about one phrase in one article. It was about the growing divide between traditional media gatekeepers and independent basketball creators. The old model depended on access. The new model depends on audience trust. And right now, a massive portion of WNBA fans trust independent breakdowns more than they trust legacy coverage. Why? Because independent creators are actually showing clips. They are freezing possessions. They are diagramming actions. They are comparing Iowa tape to Indiana tape. They are asking specific basketball questions. Meanwhile, a lot of mainstream coverage feels weirdly defensive from the start. Fans notice that, especially younger fans. You cannot dismiss thousands of people watching the same game footage and expect them to suddenly ignore what they are seeing because an analyst on television told them everything is fine. That does not work anymore. And the irony here is that some of the criticism toward Stephanie White is probably becoming harsher specifically because the media keeps trying to shut the conversation down instead of engaging with it honestly. Because once fans feel patronized, the backlash multiplies. Now every possession becomes evidence, every loss becomes proof, every stagnant offensive set becomes another viral clip. And suddenly the coach is no longer just being criticized, she becomes symbolic. That is exactly what is happening right now in Indiana. Stephanie White has unintentionally become the face of a larger argument about basketball philosophy, media credibility, and control over the narrative surrounding Caitlin Clark. That is why this story keeps growing, and the pressure is only going to intensify from here, because expectations are absurdly high. This is not a rebuilding franchise nobody cares about anymore. Indiana games are national events now. Opposing arenas sell out. Television ratings spike every time Clark plays. Every single fever possession gets clipped and analyzed within minutes online. There is nowhere to hide. And that spotlight becomes brutal when the offense looks disconnected, especially because people know what Clark-led offenses are supposed to look like. We saw it at Iowa. The pace, the freedom, the creativity, the unpredictability, the deep transition threes, the manipulation of defenders, the backbreaking assists, the psychological pressure she puts on defenses. That version of Caitlin Clark felt inevitable. This current version feels restricted. That does not mean Stephanie White is a terrible coach, but it does mean the fit between philosophy and personnel suddenly looks very questionable. Because great coaches adapt to generational talent, they do not force generational talent into rigid systems that neutralize their strengths. Phil Jackson adapted to Michael Jordan. Steve Kerr adapted to Steph Curry. Eric Spoelstra adapted to LeBron James. The entire point of elite coaching is maximizing greatness, not flattening it. And this is where the fever debate becomes fascinating, because there are moments where Indiana's offense actually does look dangerous. There are flashes where the spacing opens up, the tempo increases, and Clark starts orchestrating chaos again. When that happens, defenses look terrified. But then Indiana keeps drifting back into slower half-court sets where Clark becomes less aggressive, less dynamic, and less involved. Fans see the difference immediately. That is why patience is evaporating so quickly. The audience has already seen the ceiling. Now they are demanding consistency. And honestly, the most revealing part of this entire controversy might be how emotional the response from establishment media has become. If the criticism toward Stephanie White was truly ridiculous, analysts would simply break down the film calmly and explain the logic. Instead, many responses feel defensive before the conversation even starts. That matters, because defensive media coverage usually signals insecurity. And insecurity usually appears when institutions realize they are losing control over the public narrative. 10 years ago, sports media controlled the conversation almost completely. Not anymore. Now a creator with game footage, synergy clips, and strong editing can challenge a national television segment within hours. That completely changes the power structure. And whether mainstream analysts like it or not, fans are increasingly siding with people who show evidence instead of simply demanding trust. Which brings us back to the actual basketball question. Should Caitlin Clark play off the ball more? The answer is obviously yes, sometimes. But there is a second question that matters far more. What happens after she gives the ball up? That is the entire debate. Because elite off-ball offense requires precision. It requires screening angles, timing, spacing, read and react movement, conditioning, communication. Golden State spent years mastering it. Indiana has not mastered it yet. And until they do, every possession where Caitlin Clark becomes stationary will continue driving fans insane, especially because stationary Clark is still warping defenses without receiving the benefits of that gravity herself. That is the hidden frustration underneath all of this. Fans feel like Indiana is harvesting Caitlin Clark's gravity while minimizing Caitlin Clark's freedom. And whether that perception is fully accurate or not, it is becoming politically impossible for the Fever to ignore. Because the louder the backlash grows, the harder it becomes for the organization to defend the current system if results do not improve quickly. That is why upcoming games matter so much. Every nationally televised matchup now feels like a referendum on philosophy. If Clark dominates while aggressively controlling the offense, critics of Stephanie White will explode online. If Indiana wins through balanced movement and structured offense, White supporters will claim validation. Every game becomes ammunition, and the media ecosystem surrounding the WNBA is simply not prepared for this level of scrutiny yet. That is another uncomfortable truth. The league's popularity exploded faster than the media infrastructure surrounding it, which means analysts are now dealing with an audience that is younger, louder, more online, more obsessive, and far less willing to accept authority automatically. That changes everything. You cannot casually throw out weak narratives anymore because clips get fact-checked instantly. You cannot dismiss criticism as haters when thousands of people are posting identical offensive breakdowns. And you definitely cannot compare Indiana's static offense to Steph Curry motion basketball without getting roasted by the internet for the next 72 hours. That comparison might honestly become the defining mistake of this entire debate. Because once fans started pulling up Warriors tape side by side with Fever possessions, the argument completely fell apart. Steph Curry never stops moving. That is the point. His movement is the offense. Without the movement, the comparison becomes meaningless. And unfortunately for Stephanie White, Indiana currently looks much closer to a traditional stagnant half-court offense than anything resembling Warriors chaos basketball. That is why the criticism keeps escalating. Not because fans hate off-ball play, but because fans understand what good off-ball play actually looks like. And right now, Indiana is not consistently showing it. So now the pressure shifts directly onto Stephanie White, because eventually the discourse stops mattering. Eventually only results remain. If Indiana wins consistently, most criticism disappears. That is how sports work. Winning forgives almost everything. But if the offense continues looking disjointed while Caitlin Clark's aggression declines, the noise surrounding this team is going to become absolutely deafening, especially because the expectations attached to Clark are unlike anything the WNBA has ever experienced before. This is not normal pressure. This is franchise-altering pressure, league-altering pressure, economic pressure, and every decision surrounding her development will be analyzed endlessly. Fair or unfair, that is reality now, which means Stephanie White is coaching under a microscope every single night. And after the media accidentally exposed the exact philosophy fans were already questioning, that microscope just got even bigger. Now here is where the situation becomes genuinely dangerous for the Fever organization, because fans are no longer arguing about isolated possessions anymore. They are starting to question the entire long-term direction of the franchise. That is a completely different level of criticism. When people complain about missed shots or bad rotations, that fades quickly. Every team deals with that. But when fans start believing the organization fundamentally misunderstands how to maximize its generational superstar, panic starts spreading fast. And you can already feel that panic building online. Every Fever game now creates two completely different conversations happening at the same time. One group watches the scoreboard, the other group watches Caitlin Clark's role. That second group is enormous now, because Clark is not just another rookie anymore. She is not even just another all-star level player. She has become something far more powerful than that, a cultural